we're working towards a goal. You have a purpose, you're focused, and we want to talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls. Those things that might be causing some issues or some challenges. And we want to be able to present you with, like we did yesterday, an evaluate and a strengthen. So we want to look at what some of those pitfalls are, and then we want to offer you some suggestions on how you can deal with those, how you can overcome those pitfalls, or be more mindful of them so that you see them coming and you can prepare for them. Okay? Good. So some of the things that we're looking at, common stressors. We all have the same common stressors, right? We have household responsibilities, we have our careers, we have family dynamics. Some of us are at the stage where we're taking care of aging parents, so it's a different stage now. We're empty nesters, so our grown son now, the support that we provide is different, right? So school and sports activities, those of you that are in the thick of raising kids, that you're running back and forth, you're going from place to place. Your community involvement, whatever that may be, life crises, financial struggles, all of those are the common things that we all face, and most people across America are facing them. The additional stress that we have in ministry, these are the additional time that we have for ministry prep, the focus that we need to have for prayer, for preparing for our meetings, for all of the activities. Royal Rangers is very active ministry. It consumes time, right? So these are additional pitfalls, additional things that happen that are on top of the things that we are already dealing with.
And now I'd like to see some hands here. How many of you are in girls ministry or Rangers, but you also wear another hat in church? See your hands. There you go. So in addition to Ranger ministry, there's everything else you're doing on top of that. Okay.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the strengthening in a minute, but the second pitfall that we've seen is spouses that don't have a clear understanding of ministry expectations and feeling that there's no off, right? No off of ministry time.
And, you know, if you just think about it for a moment, we do good work. All of us, we're doing really good work. It's for the Lord. It's for the boys, the girls. It's for everything else we're doing for the church that we serve, for the community. And we can get so wrapped up in doing the work of the Lord that at times our spouse feels like, hey, when do I get some time for me? And because if we're not careful, it seems that we never have an off button when it comes to ministry. And if you're a pastor, you know that your members will call you at all hours unless you put some kind of boundary. And it seems like, well, when is the off button? All right, so let's go to the third pitfall here. Overextending ourselves to the detriment of personal and family well-being. And this does happen. And I have a friend of mine that says, look, John, busy people are the ones that you want to invite to do things, because busy people get it done. It's rare that you find somebody doing nothing whatsoever and think that they're going to get involved. Usually the busy people are the ones you can count on. So we can get more and more stuff piled on if we're not careful. And the thing is, we can overextend ourselves doing good stuff, going to camps, meetings, trainings, which we all need to do. It's very essential. But you overextend yourself. What ends up happening is your spouse, your children can feel second to ministry. And they're both, the husband and the wife, are each one involved in ministry, girls and Rangers. The kids can start feeling like, hey, when is our time going to happen? And that's a pitfall that we can all fall into. And then, of course, it seems that other people are getting the best of us. Whether it's that boy's family, that girl's family, and that counseling you're doing to help them out. Because your family can start to resent that because you're doing the work of the Lord. That's a pitfall you don't want to fall into, because it can derail the effectiveness and the longevity of your ministry.
And I'm sure if we just took a survey across the room, I'm sure a lot of you have your own pitfalls, right? Your own set of issues that you might say, these are pitfalls that I see that would get in the way of my marriage staying on mission, my relationship staying focused. We just picked these. These are the ones that stood out to us. And over the course of the 20 plus years that we've been pastoring, just some of the things that we've seen talking to ministry leaders and talking to couples and seeing what are some of the challenges that people are facing.
I want to add one more to that. Sometimes in ministry, whether you're a pastor or they're involved in worship, or girls and rangers, sometimes we feel like, hey, there's a stretch of time. Maybe this is a season that I'm going to be putting in extra time because maybe we're recruiting new commanders, we're recruiting new, a new coordinator, and we're just preparing people. So for the time being, whatever the season is, this semester, this half a year, this year, I gotta just work hard. But I know that once the team is formed, I'm gonna be able to spend more time at home. And that's something that happens at times, and we put in the extra hours. But you have to be aware that your family is going along with you, your spouse is going along with you, and that's that extra season where you're spending less and less time with the family because you're looking for that payout, that cash payout. But if you're honest with yourself, that season really never ends, does it? There's always something new that we're working toward. It's going to get easier if I invest this much more time here. It's going to get easier when the outpost grows or when I invest more time here. But sometimes that season never ends because we're constantly chasing a payday in ministry. But all the while, our family is feeling the brunt of it. And that's a pitfall that can derail our effectiveness in ministry.
So we're going to talk about strengthening now. This is where we really want to spend a good amount of time because we can all remember and know what the pitfalls are, right? Let's look at the first one. Prioritize and balance. There's talk to people, especially when we're trying to recruit leaders, right? We want to talk to them about prioritizing. And we all know we also have the same 24 hours in a day. We all do. But it's where we put our priorities and where our priorities lie. One of the things that we know is very effective is keeping a schedule and placing things that are priorities on the calendar first. And knowing that Sunday is the Lord's Day. There's no negotiating with that. The day that we have separated for the Lord, for our family, as a family to go to church. So, sorry kids, we don't do birthday parties, we don't do pizza parties. Sunday is the Lord's Day, right? So those are the things that you put on a calendar, and sometimes we have to reevaluate that calendar often, because before we know it, we overcommit and we go back to, again, to the detriment of our own personal health and well-being. We overcommit on our calendar, and we're like, well, hold on. We need to look at the calendar, and we need to get back on track. Some of those priorities should include exercise, days off, a Sabbath, vacations, and hobbies. There's a study that shows that if these priorities, the ones that you see listed there, are done with your family, the positive effect multiplies. So again, spending time with our family, doing these things that we prioritize for ourselves.
I want to add to the keeping a schedule. What else would you place in your calendar? The start of the year, prioritize birthdays, anniversary, your time off, vacations, your children's sporting events, anything that's important. Because when you have events coming at you and you want to put it into your calendar as a natural instinct, you want to say, oh, I can't. I already have a prior commitment. So prioritize your family, those things that are important, and then everything else can kind of have its place. But this way, you're safeguarding what's the most important.
We're going to look next at clear communication of ministry expectations. And I think this is just one of those basic skills, a communication skill. Many times we have specific expectations, or sometimes you don't even know. You know that the event is going to be this long, but you're not really sure how much pre-prep time you're going to need and how much post-prep time. Coming back from camps, you all know. Road Rangers, you know. I know. I'm not a Road Ranger, but I know. All the time that it takes, the menus, the shopping. If you don't have a huge team, a lot of that falls on us as helpers. And so all of that pre-prep. And then when they get home from camp, Sister Alice shared with us the pile of laundry, right, that comes home. And so now it's not just the weekend that you spent, but it's the week before and the week after. So clearly being able to say, you know what, I don't know the time commitment, but this is what I do know. I know that I'm going to need time before, and I need for you to be flexible with me so that you are communicating it. A lot of times, miscommunication is no communication, right? You miscommunicate because you're just not talking about it. So being able to talk about it, being able to put it on the table and say, look, these are the things that I expect. So when you go to a camp and you're gone for 3 days, on Monday when you get back, my expectation is that you're not answering any of the parents, you're gonna take that day off, and we're gonna sit down and we're gonna have dinner. And you can spend the whole time at dinner telling me about the camp. I'm okay with that. But it's just gonna be time for us to connect without any of the other outside, distractions, okay? The I statements, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. I feel neglected when you spend so much time doing X, Y, or Z, right? And I know that the way that I feel matters to him. So when I communicate it that way, it's not like he can say, well, you're wrong, right? Because that's how I feel. And so if he's gonna validate how I feel, then I'm at least letting him know, I feel this way. And I know that it's for a good reason. I know that the boys need a mentor. I know that you need to spend this time doing this, but I feel this way. And that's the opportunity for him to say, okay, well, I don't want you to feel that way, so what can I do to help? What can we change? How can we approach this in a different way, okay? Check in often, monthly or weekly family meetings to stay focused on priorities and maintaining balance. That's really important. We had a family at our church that it was a lot of conflict, a lot of time. And it was centered around a lot of kids. They had a lot of kids, and just them not having a lot of guidance, because the mom just assumed that everybody knew what they needed to do, and everybody saw the schedule on the refrigerator and knew where everyone was supposed to be. And it didn't work that way. They needed a check-in point. How is this working out? How are we navigating these changes that have happened with our schedule? So having a check-in time, once a week, once a month, whatever works for your family. But that needs to be a priority, because your families need to also know that you're aware that they're there. Sometimes you come and go, you're in and out doing things, and it's like, hello, hi, we're here. And so this is an opportunity for them to know that it's about them. It's about your spouse, it's about your kids, it's about your family.
Yeah, let me just say one thing on this. And let's just say for a moment that it's husband and wife. You're both in ministry, whether you're both in Royal Rangers or Royal Rangers and Girls Ministries, and you're both involved, you're both doing the work of the Lord. The two of you are encouraging one another to just be your best and do your best, and you understand the demands of the ministry. You still have to stop and think about the quality time you're spending. Are you giving time to your needs? Are the two of you cultivating that romance, that love, that time together? Is your marriage being strengthened, or by doing the right thing, the good thing, ministry, you're spending less and less time together, and you're starting to weaken your relationship? People in ministry can also get divorced, and that happens, and it's tragic. Don't ever let yourself drift because of the ministry demands. Check in. Make sure that you're spending time together, and check in with your children. Make sure your children are getting the best of you, and that they don't feel like they're getting second best from mom and dad. So that's very important. Be active in ministry, yes, but never neglect your relationship.
So this is an important one. Support structure. What support structure do you have in place for each other, right? As a ministry spouse, sometimes we feel like people don't understand, unless you meet another pastor's wife, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, you totally know how I feel, right? And that's important. We know as ministry leaders, we don't trust our private lives, all of the things that we're struggling with, to anyone. We can't. We're leaders, but we need to find people that we can confide in. Godly influences, godly people that are going to give us wise counsel, that are going to hold us accountable, right? If you know that you're struggling in your marriage for that one-on-one time, as a man, he needs to have men in his life that are going to hold him accountable and say, hey, John, are you putting in time with your wife? Are you, because I know you struggle with that. So are you being accountable to someone outside of your marriage as well? And so having those relationships, those strong, godly relationships with someone that you can say, man, I'm struggling right now. I'm feeling like I'm torn in 100 directions, and I don't feel like I have a lot of support. I don't feel like anyone really understands how I feel. Someone that can listen and give you good counsel. And again, with your spouse, that active listening, right? That's tough, because sometimes we have to have tough conversations and say, hey, you know what? This isn't cool. time out, we need to stop, we need to take a breather, and I need to feel like he's listening because, again, our time has to be focused. We can't sit and have 4-hour conversations, right? Sometimes that's just not feasible. So we need to be able to know that we're being heard, that our concerns are being actively listened to so that we feel validated in how we feel. So the power of synergy. When there is alignment and agreement, you have positioned yourself for being on mission. You will be more effective when you are two than one. I know when he knows that he has my full support, not only emotionally, but mentally, physically, and in every way, I know he feels free to do more and to really dive in because he knows that I'm supporting him, that I'm there and I understand.
It's like that triple braided cord we talked about yesterday. Husband and wife can fight so hard together, but you put God in the mix, you're going to have a very strong and effective ministry.
So staying on track. When we want to stay on mission, some of those things, those pitfalls, right? And then we looked at strengthening. One of the areas that we really see a lot is conflict resolution. And we're going to look at conflict resolution and we're going to evaluate. So looking at that, I know it's difficult. Again, if culturally you were taught that conflict resolution means yelling because that's the model that you had, then the last thing that you're going to want to do is resolve conflict, right? So we need to look at that. We need to determine and look at what are we doing for conflict resolution.
One more? Right there. Let's look at the pitfall of conflict. This is one of Satan's favorite plays in his playbook. He loves this right here. Paul says this in 2 Corinthians 2, verses 10 and 11. When you forgive this man, I forgive him too, and when I forgive whatever needs to be forgiven, I do so with Christ's authority for your benefit, so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. Just think about that. What would you do if you're a high school football captain and you found somewhere on the ground, you found the opposing team's playbook and that game is 3 days away? Would that be beneficial to you? Well, think about that. Well, we have Satan's playbook in God's Word, and one of his moves is conflict. Because conflict, the devil will use it to split ministries apart, people apart, and it derails ministries, it derails couples all the time. In this case, this person, this individual, we don't know the person's name, but apparently opened the door to a group that came from the outside, and they turned the Church of Corinth against Paul. And they caused so much problems, it made him cry. I'll speak more about that in a minute. But after everything died down, the people, they came and they set this person, they disciplined this person. Now Paul is saying, hey, now you got to forgive them. I'm going to forgive them with you. Because unforgiveness is a problem. This person needs to be restored. Because we're not going to let the devil outsmart us. And this is the way we have to think when it comes to being in ministry together. We cannot let conflict to go unresolved because the devil takes advantage of it. I'm going to give you an example of that. We all know Paul and Barnabas. Holy Spirit called them to do mission together, and they were so effective. But something broke them apart. Okay? The book of Acts chapter 15 says this. After some time, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit each city that we previously preached the word of the Lord in to see how the new believers are doing. Barnabas agreed and wanted to take John Mark, his nephew. But Paul disagreed strongly since John Mark had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in their work. The disagreement was so sharp that they separated. Barnabas took John and Mark with him and sailed to Cyprus. Paul chose Silas, and he left the believers entrusted him to the Lord's gracious care. So think about it. These two, the Lord had called them to be together, and they split apart over a disagreement. John Mark left, abandoned them. We don't know why. And Paul was a stickler. You know what? Commitment. Barnabas was like, no, let's give him a chance. Let's build him up. And they couldn't get through that impasse. Now, I'm sure the two remained friends, and I know that John Mark eventually connected with Paul later on. But just think of how powerful that conflict was, that it separated the two of them. If it did that to Paul and Silas, conflict can divide churches, it can divide marriages. So we have to learn to resolve conflict. How do we do that? How do strengthen ourselves to avoid conflict? And if we are in conflict, how do we resolve it? Let's talk about how do you prevent conflict. First, an issue arises, usually our emotions get the best of us. Here's a very good tactic. Wait until you're calm, unless you're already calm and you're able to stay calm, but most of us don't really stay that way. Wait till you're calm. You don't have to address an issue when it happens. So if you feel like you're getting flooded with emotions, maybe tell your spouse, and be okay with this. I need a little time, okay? Go for a walk. Talk about it tomorrow. This is important. You know, they've done a study. I find this fascinating. They put couples, and somehow I guess they did all the biometrics on them, and they have them fight. They're having real arguments, and they're looking at their blood pressure and heart rate spike. But they found something to be very interesting. When the two were separated, the women, their blood pressure would drop, their heart rate would drop, they were able to talk to others. The men, their blood pressure and their heart rate stayed elevated. Here's what they found out. We have more difficulty processing our emotions. So what happens a lot of times in a fight, in a conflict, the woman, she wants to resolve, usually it's right now, right? And the man wants to walk away. Oh no, you're not walking away. We need to talk about this right now. And he is getting flooded with emotions, and usually men will respond in one of three ways. This is generalized, of course. They'll either be quiet, just kind of shut down, and that's not helpful, it makes her even angrier, or they raise their voice because they want to be dominant so that she would finally stop, and he could breathe. Or something else men like to do, we just walk out and we leave. And that infuriates women. But usually when that's happening, psychologists call that flooding. Best thing to do is say, hey, I just can't right now. Walk away, deal with it later, and then when you're able to process it carefully, then do it, because your relationship is worth more than that conflict that you're facing. You can get through it. Something else is, when you're addressing a conflict, address the behavior. Don't attack your spouse. Okay? If he leaves his socks, dirty socks, outside the hamper, and you've been telling him for 1,000 times to pick it up, don't attack him by saying, who raised you? You're such a pig. Those are personal attacks. Okay? And guess what happens when you attack someone? Okay, let's see men, let's see all the men here. If you're walking on the street and somebody bumps into you, and they say, what's up, fool, and pushes you, what's your first reaction? Oh, the Lord bless you, I'm so sorry. What's your first inclination? You want to say, what's up? And you want to square off. Something in us kind of, rises, because we respond to aggression. So instead of attacking the person, attack the issue. And when you do that, you're able to differentiate between the behavior and the person. You love the person, you just want them to change what they're doing. And that's a really good way to avoid that conflict. Something else. Okay, there it is. Express how the behavior in question makes you feel. Start with I statements, not with you statements. We said this yesterday. You statements basically, when you start with you, it's a fighting word. You're a pig, or you're inconsiderate. Why do you leave the orange juice on the counter? Put it in the fridge. It's just 3 steps. And you start using the you statements, people get defensive. When you use the I statements, you use something like, hey, I feel so disappointed, or so let down, or I feel sad every time. You leave their juice out, or you don't drop your dirty clothes in the hamper, or whatever it may be. It's hard to accuse someone of the way they feel. And now you're talking about feelings, and you can address someone's feelings because they're not attacking you. So that's another good statement, another good way to do it. But what if you're in conflict? How do you resolve conflict? Paul the Apostle was a master at conflict resolution. In fact, the book of 2 Corinthians captures the way Paul resolved a major tension in a church that he started and that turned on him and made him cry. And he would not give up on that church. And it just tells us something. There are relationships that are too important to give up. And it's up to us to fight, to reconcile, especially when the relationship is your marriage. Never allow pride to destroy your relationship. Well, you have to understand some of the events that took place in Corinth. And I'll read through it quickly to understand how Paul worked through the reconciliation process with them. This comes from Ralph Barr. He organizes the events that took place in Corinth. So here we go. The first one is this. Timothy is sent to Corinth on a special mission, as Paul would do in his network of ministries. At the same time, a crisis forms in the Corinthian church, fostered by the coming of Judaizers, a group of men that Paul would later on refer to pejoratively as super apostles. And they came to tell the church, based on what Paul writes, you can infer what took place. Apparently, Paul's not telling you the full truth. In fact, he's not a real apostle. He doesn't have letters from the church of Jerusalem. He's really, harsh when he writes, but he's very weak in person. He doesn't have miracles like we do, can't perform them. He's not eloquent. He doesn't have the look of an apostle, hasn't had the special visions that we have. And they came in, and someone, we don't know who, opened the door to them. Apparently it was this one gentleman he addresses in 2 Corinthians 2. And there is opposition to Paul's authority. There already was in 1 Corinthians, now in 2 Corinthians. Now during this time, its opposition has grown. Timothy doesn't know how to control the situation. So he goes back to Paul and says, Paul, this is out of control. So what ends up happening is, Paul hears this and he says, this is serious. So a letter's not going to do. So he heads out to visit the Corinthians to settle the matter. He refers to this visit as the visit of pain. He shows up, he's humiliated before the church, he leaves in tears. Imagine Paul, a strong, authoritative man, broken, and he goes back to where he was, and he's heartbroken. Okay, there we go. And from there, from Ephesus, he writes a letter reprimanding them. And this at personal cost. He didn't want to do it. He hurt him to write this way. This letter is known as the letter of tears, also known as the severe letter, where he just lets them have it. But there's tears because he's expressing his love and the hurt that they caused him. The letter has been lost. Some believe that maybe partially preserved in what we know as 2 Corinthians chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. The tenor, the tone of that letter is a little bit more harsh. Maybe that's it. I don't think it is, but that's a kind of a view out there. Titus is instructed to meet Paul at Troas, and he wants to use him again, not Timothy. Timothy didn't know how to handle it, but apparently Titus was stronger, and Paul needs him to go. I want you to before I go any further, I want you to see something. When Paul left, he's going to address the issue, but he wrote a letter. He tells us in chapter 1 of 2 Corinthians that he didn't want to go again in person, because he didn't want to cause another painful visit to them or to himself. He's practicing this thing of, I'm going to cool down, write a letter, organize my thoughts, and then send that letter so that, they're not getting the most emotional side of me, and he created a distance. And that's very wise of him to have done that. So, let's see here. According to the plan set forth in 1 Corinthians 16, but after some setbacks caused by Paul's painful visit to Corinth, he leaves Ephesus for Macedonia. He arrives at Troas. He can't find Titus. He couldn't text him, couldn't find him, and he is distraught. So he goes to Macedonia trying to catch up with him. Imagine just how slow this process was for him. So Paul finally meets up with Titus, who had already gone to Corinth. And Titus informs him, Paul, listen, the worst is over. The rebellion has died down. They're sorry for what happened. In fact, they want to see you again. And Paul is so, just imagine how elated he must have felt, or relief he must have felt. So then he heads to makes plans to go and see him. But before I go to the next slide, here's what I want to point out, is that Paul already started that church. He had poured into them. If they turned on him, he could have very easily have said, you know what? Okay, you want those super apostles? Go with them. And okay, God bless you. And I did my part. I have other parts of the world to preach the gospel in. But look at all he's done to reconcile them back to himself. And they're the ones that wronged him. Because certain relationships matter. And it's worth putting all your effort to save. And that includes our marriage. So then he writes the letter that we know as 2 Corinthians in its entirety, or as something maybe the last 4 strong chapters are directed to finish with the last appearance of rebellion, or he wrote the first 9 chapters and then maybe a scribe added the other 4 at the end. That could be a possibility as well. But he sends this letter from Macedonia through Titus, accompanied by 2 brothers. And so there's a presence of 3 now. And after that, we're told that Paul finally shows up, and that relationship was fully restored. What a beautiful model of reconciliation. Well, there's a few things that I want to highlight here. Some steps to reconcile if you're in it right now, and you feel like we're just not seeing it eye to eye, we're having issues. Are you ready? Let's look at some of Paul's strategies. First of all, seek reconciliation. Your spouse should not be the one that always initiates. I have men that get so mad. She always wants me to be the one, or she says, it has to always be me. If I don't say, I'm sorry, or let's work it out, he will just ignore it and not talk to me for 5 days. You should never be that way. You should always, both, should always be willing to reconcile, because relationships truly matter. Okay? They truly matter. He says in 2 Corinthians 6, 11 to 13, oh, dear Corinthian friends, we have spoken honestly with you, and our hearts are open to you. There is no lack of love on our part, but you have withheld your love from us. I am asking you to respond as if you were my own children and open your hearts to us. So this is the 2 Corinthian letters. After, apparently, they were okay with Paul. But apparently there was still some resistance. He said, open your hearts to us. We love you. Please. We want everything to be okay. He could have had pride. He could have said, forget you. He loves them. And this is the attitude every couple should have. Second one is admit fault. That's hard to do. But when it's your marriage, admit fault. Tell your spouse, I'm sorry. Even if you're not fully to blame, own up to your part in this conflict. Admit fault. Let your spouse know why you love them. Never lose sight of the fact that the person you're fighting with is the person you married because you love that person. Never lose sight of that. And then the third thing is give your spouse hope for the marriage. Let them know that you want this to work. Now these are 3 points that Paul incorporates in his strategy. For example, 2 Corinthians 7, he says, please open your hearts to us. We have not done wrong to anyone, nor led anyone astray, or taken advantage of anyone. I think if Paul would have done that, he would have apologized. He was innocent this time around, but we're not always innocent, are we? Okay, it's not always our spouse's fault, or fully their fault. I'm not saying this to condemn you. I said before, you are in our hearts, and we live or die together with you. I love that. I have the highest confidence in you, and I take great pride in you. You have greatly encouraged me and made me happy despite all our troubles. I still love you. So admit fault, let your spouse know why you love them, and give them hope. I want this to work. This is not over. Here's number 3. Sometimes saying I'm sorry is not enough. If you're in the wrong, ask your spouse what you need to do to repair the situation. I spoke yesterday, and I gave an example. I'll give it again. If I were to back up into Mike's car, and I get out and say, Mike, I'm so sorry. I was just tired. I didn't see it. He'd probably say to me, it's okay, it happens. And then I say, hey, God bless you. I got to go to church. He's going to say, wait. What about my car? Who's going to fix my car? We need to exchange insurance. The I'm sorry is not okay. And sometimes when we mess up, and I'm sorry may not be enough. And if you're in the wrong, ask your spouse, what do I need to do to fix it? Say sorry to your family, or what do I need to do? Do I need to start coming, what are you going to do? Come home more often, or repair something? And we have to be clear on that.
And one of the things that we have seen with this particular issue is a list that keeps going and going and going, right? He asks me what he needs to do for me to feel like the I'm sorry had the weight that it needed to, so that I can be okay with the I'm sorry. And today I say, well, if you do A and B. And then tomorrow I'm like, okay, well, you did A and B, but now I have C and D. And we keep that list going. No, that's not going to work. We have to be able to talk about it and say, okay, I appreciate that you're saying I'm sorry, but I really need for you to spend more time doing this at this time with me. And when he honors that commitment, he honored that commitment. So we're good. We need to move on. We can't keep a running list. That will always make our spouse feel like it's never enough. And saying I'm sorry just are words, and committing holds no value anymore.
This is how Paul, what he required of them. I wrote to you as I did to test you and see if you would fully comply with my instructions. See that? That was a demand he had. You want to make things right? I need you to make it right by doing this. Apparently, check this individual who opened the door and caused problems. When you forgive this man, I forgive him too. And that's the part we already read earlier. He'll say, I think it's in chapter 9, I'm glad this letter caused you to sorrow because it led you to repent. And look at how you move so quickly to make things right. And he had placed a demand and they met it. Sometimes, I'm sorry, it's not enough. And what can I do to fix it? Then go out of your way to do it so that you can mend that relationship with your spouse. And finally, usually when there's a conflict, sometimes trust is, kind of lost. Depends on what the situation was. And you have to understand that if you want to resolve conflict, you have to give your spouse trust. I get infidelity, that's a different issue, and that, it's also possible to heal and solve. But I'm not talking necessarily about that, but just trust in general. You have to give them trust after trust has been broken if you want to mend that relationship. Paul says to them in 2 Corinthians 7:16, I'm very happy now because I have complete confidence in you. At the end of the conflict, he says, I trust you fully as a church, despite of what's happened. Many people say, well, they got to earn their trust back. In some situations, it's true, especially in the case of infidelity. I get that. But think of it this way. If you hire a manager to open and close a store, do you say, I'm going to wait a year before I give you the keys? I'm going to be watching you, and if you show up every day at the right time, I'll open the door until I can trust you and give you the keys. Or do you say, I'm going to give you the keys and trust you until you break that, and then we'll have to have a conversation? You have to give trust at times and allow a relationship to continue. Be gracious enough to do that for your husband or your wife, because reconciliation is important. Your ministry is important, but your ministry, the strength of it, the longevity of it, depends on the health, the strength of that ministry. So always work to reconcile. Never fall into that pitfall, because Satan loves to use that playbook on you. So that's what we have for you. We wanted to end right here. We know there's an award ceremony, but we want to thank you for listening to us today and opening your hearts to what we have to say.
And our prayer is that these are conversation starters for you. That you can, on your drive, when you're going back home, have conversations about this. Talk about some of these topics. That's how you can process some of this, right? You don't want to process conflict resolution when you're in the middle of conflict, right? You want to process it and talk about it. What can we do better next time? When we have conflict, how can we avoid it? And can we talk about some things that we have had reoccurring conflict about? So that's one of the things that we really pray, is that this would leave you with some tools for your marriages, for your ministries. Conflict resolution can be used in all interpersonal relationships. So we pray that this was a blessing to your lives.
May I pray for you? May I pray for you real quickly? Let's pray. Father, thank you for marriage. What a gift you've given us. To have a partner that can be with us for life. And I just pray that you would strengthen every marriage here. That, Lord, they would be healthy, they would be thriving, they would just experience the joy of living a life filled with love and companionship. And Lord, help us to avoid these pitfalls, that we may have a strong and thriving marriage, that our marriage may always be on mission. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you all. Thank you so much.